Greetings and welcome to God Save the King. My name is Tim Keyes. I'm the host of your show today. And as always, you can listen to the Truth Be Told radio network. You can listen to God Save the King on the Truth Be Told radio network every Friday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern. There's also a lot of other great shows on Truth Be Told network. I highly encourage you to listen to them as well. The best ways to listen to the Truth Be Told radio network, number one, is simply go to their website. Go to www.truthbetoldnetwork.org and listen and click on the big listen button. Okay. So you can also listen on your Android app, on MyTuner, on Wi-Fi radio, on TuneIn Radio. And of course, you can listen on Alexa, Google, and Apple home devices, as well, of course, your smartphone, because your smartphone is a smart device. Also, last but not least, you can call in to listen to the Truth Be Told radio network at 641-741-2866 or also at 717-567-4977. So once again, my name is Tim Keyes, and this is God Save the King on the Truth Be Told radio network. So what I want to do today is we are in what is commonly known as, the holiday season, right? We're coming up on Christmas, right? And yet, going back to the beginning of God Save the King and reminding everyone that there are several fundamental premises on which God Save the King is built. And premise number one is the fact that Jesus was not born on December 25th. Okay. Now we repeat this fact, ad nauseum. It's because it is the central feature around which God Save the King is based. Okay. Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. And a lot of people, that comes as a shock to them. Other people, not so much. And of course, there's a lot of people that they're not surprised to find out that he was not born on December 25th. And yet they just continue to, for lack of a better word, pretend that he was, that they still celebrate Christmas. They still celebrate the birth of Christ on December 25th. And we hear, Jesus is the reason for the season and all these other statements made around this time of year. Now, but what that does mean is that makes this a great time of the year to have some of these discussions, to talk about the fact that, well, he wasn't born on December 25th. And if that's a challenge, well, then my challenge to you, and I mean this very respectfully, I'm not here to, wreck your tradition necessarily. I mean, on one hand, I'm not here to wreck your tradition. On the other hand, yeah, I am here to wreck your tradition, okay? Because I think there's a far better tradition to be had. See, and I'm going to slip in a different word here in a second. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar, which is the word ritual, okay? See, now the word ritual, when you perform a ritual, rituals can be very, very good things. When a ritual is done properly, it's an excellent thing, because what ritual is there to help us, remind us of something, frankly, that should not be forgotten. I love phrasing it that way. I'm taking that from a quote from the movie version of The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay. Now, it may be a direct quote from one of the books. I just don't know which book. It's been a long time since I have read them. And especially if it happens to be from the Silmarillion, then I really don't remember exactly where the quote came from. But if you're watching the movie version by Peter Jackson's treatment of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's the very first movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, and the lady Galadriel is narrating over the introduction, and she's talking about the ring, of course, but she says, history became legend, legend became myth, and some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. And I think that that is a tremendous concept that we can readily apply to God Save the King, that the birth of Christ has been lost. The accurate birth of Christ has been lost, and it's been lost for 2,000 years. We have not told the story properly in 2,000 years. We have settled for the traditional version, okay? And that's not really a very good thing, in my opinion, that we've settled for the traditional version, because there are so many things about the traditional version that simply are not correct, that I really don't think we can. And I'm really, like, again, I'm really not trying to ruin anybody's day, but that I just don't really think we're honoring God with a lot of the traditional concepts, right? So, number one, Jesus was not born on December 25th. Number two, by engaging in the traditional Christmas story, especially to the exclusion of a real, legitimate, genuine look at what it really would have looked like. The traditional Christmas story is what I now call Christian mythology. And I think, I know a lot of people are going to be offended at that. They're not going to like to hear that, but I don't think that phrase is incorrect. I think it's extremely accurate that the traditional version of the Nativity story is Christian mythology. And let me tell you why. And that is because tradition is not evidence. If we want to learn what the real nativity looked like, and you see, if you look at the scroll at the bottom of my screen, right, I got information about my show scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I want you to pay attention to my website, www.godsavetheking.org, but then look at the little tagline I put there. Maybe the nativity doesn't look like we think it does. GodSaveTheKing.org, right? Because the nativity doesn't look like we think it does. In the very broad strokes, there's a lot of features that are in common. Joseph and Mary definitely traveled to Bethlehem. It's highly questionable whether she rode on a donkey or not, but they definitely traveled to Bethlehem. They definitely traveled to Bethlehem for a registration. Okay. Jesus was definitely laid in a manger where shepherds found him in swaddling clothes. But the mind picture that we carry is not the correct one. We carry a mind picture that was invented about 200 years after he was born, and then etched in stone, so to speak, about 1,000 years later. And we just won't give it up. We love our tradition and we will not give that up. But the problem is that tradition is not evidence. If you want to know what the real nativity looked like, what you have to do is you have to start with a blank slate. You guys have all heard me say this numerous times. You have to start with a blank slate, a blank canvas, and then begin to examine the evidence and be willing to go where the evidence takes you. Okay. And to not be, what's the word I want to use? Detoured, right? To not get detoured by the traditional sources. Now, it is my intention next week to talk about, pardon me here, I got a little itch there I got to deal with. It is my intention next week to talk about some of the traditional sources of the traditional story. Where did these myths come from? Because that is what they are. They are myths. So where did they come from, and how did we adapt them, right? So, but like I keep saying, what you're supposed to do is you start with a blank canvas, a blank slate, and then you start with, okay, piece of evidence number one tells us this, piece of evidence number two tells us this, and then you start putting the puzzle together piece by piece. But the trick here is that you don't have a picture to go by. When we do a jigsaw puzzle, you've got the picture on the outside of the box that tells you what the puzzle looks like. This is a little different. This is like doing a jigsaw puzzle, and there's no picture on the box. You have no idea what the puzzle is, what the picture is, right? And you dump all the pieces out onto the table, and you've got to figure it out, right? So maybe you do start out by sorting out the pieces and you put all the edge pieces in one pile, and then you find, oh, now there's evidently a bunch of red in the picture. So all the pieces that have a little bit of red in them go in this pile, and all the pieces that have a little bit of blue in them go in this pile, et cetera, et cetera. And then you slowly and painstakingly put the pieces together until you get the picture that you may not recognize until it's done. Okay. So Jesus was not born on December 25th. The traditional nativity story is Christian mythology. It is wholly inaccurate. Tradition is not evidence. You don't get any points for believing the tradition. And you won't get any points in the laboratory. You wouldn't get any points in a court of law. It's not how it works. You need to present your case. Okay. You need to present your case line by line and item by item. Okay. And then, of course, another premise of God Save the King is that we rarely tell it in its historical context. There is a ton of historical context, and that's part of what I want to talk about tonight. There is a ton of historical context that really helps us put this in its proper perspective, to put it in its proper context, both biblically and historically, because there are tons of legitimate historical figures that are part of the story, or at least very closely interrelated, that help us understand what this picture would have really, really, really looked like. So, one of the things I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk about a period of time that is commonly known as the intertestamental period. Okay. Now, that's a big fancy word that means between the testaments. In other words, the testaments as we have them laid out in the Bible. We have a subdivision called the Old Testament and a subdivision called the New Testament. So, this is the period of time, quote unquote, that is between the testaments. Okay. So, I'm going to open up my Bible here and I'm going to turn to the book of Malachi. Okay. So there's the book of Malachi, chapter 4, ending in verse 6. And then here, you see on the page next to it, it says the New Testament, right? So what's really interesting about this is that when you go from this page to this page, actually, the next page where it's Matthew 1:1, right? That's 400 years. That is 400 years worth of time. Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6 reads, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of that great and terrible day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." Wow. Wow. Really powerful verse to end the Old Testament with, what we call the Old Testament. But then you turn one page, okay? And this is just because the Bible is laid out this way. It's got nothing to do with trying to tell the story, right? It's just how the Bible is laid out. You turn the page, Matthew 1:1, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, right? But like I said, the point is there's 400 years of time in one page, 2 pages, right? 400 years. So to put that in perspective, I want you to think about it this way. I want you to imagine that we're living 2,000 years from now, that we can transport ourselves forward in time, and it's 2,000 years from now. And 2,000 years from now, someone digs up a history book, okay? And that history book covers a big chunk of time. It covers at least several hundred, if not 1,000 years, or maybe even 2,000 years are covered in this history book, right? But it's divided into 2 sections. Convenient illustration here. It's divided into 2 sections, quite like the Bible is, right? Except I'm using an illustration where we're way in the future and now we're looking backwards, right? So we're 2,000 years in the future. We discover this book. It's a historical book. It's laid out in 2 significant segments. And one segment, the older segment, ends, okay, with the publication of the King James Bible in 1611. That's when it ends. Okay? Ends with the King James Bible, publication of it in 1611. And then the first section, or pardon me, the beginning of the next section, right? It begins with the inauguration of Joe Biden as the 46th president of the United States. Okay? So 400 years between the publication of the King James Bible and the inauguration of Joe Biden as president. 400 years. So here's my question, and that is, do you think in reading that book, we would have a proper grasp of the historical continuity and or the political or ideological thought from the end of the first segment to the beginning of the second segment? And that should, obviously, that should be incredulous. It is simply not possible to have even a basic understanding of a period of time in the past from a single source if it contains a gap that large. Okay? If it contains a gap that big and that's our only source, there is no way we're going to understand the continuity from one segment to the next. It is just way, 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 way too big of a period of time. Way too big. Okay. So now this gap between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and like I said, that's just how the Bible is laid out. Okay. This gap between the two testaments is approximately 400 years, and it is commonly referred to as the Intertestamental Period. Okay. It is also sometimes referred to as the silent years. And the reason it's sometimes called the silent years is because there is no record of a Hebrew prophet living in the land at that time, writing or speaking. Okay. Let me say that again, that during that period of time, 400 years from the end of Malachi, it's actually a little bit longer when you consider when Malachi would have been written, okay, as opposed to it was most likely written around 430 BC, okay, and the Gospel of Matthew was not likely written prior to about 60 AD. So when you put that all together, that's almost 500 years, right? But let me repeat that last point. It's sometimes referred to as the silent years because there is no record of a Hebrew prophet living in the land who was either writing or speaking at that time. So therefore, it is as if God was silent, but only as if. Okay. God was not silent. God was still on the throne. God was still working. But from a certain perspective, it appears as if God was silent. Now, in a theological sense, this is extremely provocative because due to the perceived silence, when a true prophet of God finally arrived on the scene, first in John the Baptist, and then, of course, in Jesus himself, that means that people were hungry for the word of the Lord and they flocked to hear it. Okay. So, and this hunger fueled messianic expectation that was widespread throughout Judea at the time. Okay. Especially 30 to 40 years earlier when Jesus was being born. That's when messianic expectation was truly at its peak, but it was still going on when he did publicly come on the scene, roughly 30 years later, right? So now, similarly, just so you're aware, throughout the known world, messianic expectation was at an all-time high. Now, they were not all expecting the Jewish Messiah, make no mistake, but the broad and general notion of messianic expectation was going on at that time. If you research the Roman Empire at that time, you'll discover what is referred to as the Pax Romana, which is this golden age, quote unquote, this golden age of um, of what was going on in the Roman Empire, and the fact that they were interpreting their own prophecies and they were interpreting the stars and things like that as referring to, frankly, referring to Augustus Caesar and this golden age that he had ushered in, because the Roman Empire was in a period of relative peace, okay, comparatively speaking. So, at any rate, it is this intertestamental period, and especially the final 100 years of the intertestamental period, that forms the historical context for the birth of Christ. Okay, so we will be spending a lot of time. Number one, I mean, it really, for extended context, you got to go all the way back to number one, you got to go all the way back to Abraham, right? Because as we've talked about, you've got to get the Jewish perspective, right? And the Jewish perspective, okay, comes from the promises God made to Abraham in the Abrahamic covenant, and then through the subsequent covenants that then amplified the features of the Abrahamic covenant. So you have to understand the nation of Israel in light of the Abrahamic covenant. You have to understand the Jewish religion in light of the Mosaic covenant, right? Then you jump forward to David, okay? And you have to understand what happened to the nation under Saul, and then David, and then Solomon, and then under Rehoboam. You have to understand the divided kingdom, and that the divided kingdom therefore led to the Assyrian and the Babylonian captivities. These are all critical points in the broad stroke context to help us understand what's going on in the small stroke context. So you've got to have at least a basic understanding of these things. So on one hand, we go back 2,000 years for Abraham. On the other hand, we only go back about 1,000 years to David. On the other hand, we go back about 600 years, 6/700 years to the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities. But then we move forward from the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities through a period of Persian hegemony, and then Greek hegemony, and then finally the Romans. And like I said, it's the last 100 years of the intertestamental period that really form the context, and especially about the final 40 years of the intertestamental period that really form our context. Okay. So, in light of that, remember that the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom, and then the Persians conquered the Babylonians. Okay. The Persians continued to be the dominating force in and around Israel for about 100 years after the close of the Old Testament canon. In other words, so into the intertestamental period. So, in other words, another way you could say it is for about the first 100 years of the intertestamental period. Okay. The Persians were still the dominating force in the region. It wasn't until they were overthrown by the Greeks that, frankly, the Greeks become the dominant force, and they start to influence things in Israel. And that's part of what I want to get at tonight, is understanding what happened under the Greeks, okay? Because we started this show out by talking about the fact that this is a very interesting time of the year, right? We call this the holidays, right? Because we call it the holidays because of Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and Hanukkah, okay? Now, the Feast of Hanukkah has already passed this year. It ended a couple of days ago. But that is very provocative as well. And we're going to talk about that tonight, because the Feast of Hanukkah plays a significant role in the context of God Save the King in at least one way, and maybe even in two very significant ways. But like I said, for about the first 100 years of the intertestamental period, it was the Persian Empire that continued to dominate Israel. Okay. Now, the Persians did, however, allow the Jews to go home. Okay. Now, that is another critical piece of information. Okay. The Persians allowed a big chunk of the Jewish captives, okay, inherited from Babylon, they allowed them to go home. Now, in light of that, very important to understand that all throughout the Old Testament, the monarchy and the priests, okay, the hereditary monarchy and the hereditary priesthood, it was really a very important thing to make sure that those two things remained separate, okay? Very, very important that those two things remain separate. Okay. I'm actually trying to find, yeah. So in the Old Testament, it was the clear biblical mandate for the nation of Israel that the institutions of the priesthood and the monarchy should remain separate. Okay. The priestly line came from the tribe of Levi in general, and then specifically from the sons of Aaron. The monarchy came from the tribe of Judah in general, and then specifically from the house of David. Okay. Now, although this distinction may be familiar to biblical readers, Bible readers, those of us that are already familiar with the Bible, this distinction may be familiar. What's important to notice is that it was unusual for this to be the case in ancient Near Eastern cultures, where the priesthood and the monarchy were at the very least connected, if not oftentimes identical. Okay. So accordingly, during the first temple era, okay, the first temple, built by Solomon, the first temple, accordingly, during the first temple era, the separation of powers limited the priests to temple service and interpreting and teaching the Torah. Likewise, political power rested officially in the hands of the monarchy, okay? But then, like we've already said, along come the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar conquers the southern kingdom, sacks Jerusalem, destroys the temple, and takes a substantial portion of the nation into captivity. So, in relative terms, both the hereditary priesthood and the hereditary monarchy were, quote unquote, destroyed. Okay. From a certain perspective, they're gone, right? Because the temple is gone too at this point, right? Now, years later, like we've said, when the Medo-Persians conquered the Babylonians, Cyrus the Great allows the Jews to return home and rebuild their temple. So this necessitates the restoration of the hereditary priesthood to serve in the temple, okay, which it was. The hereditary priesthood was destroyed. The hereditary monarchy, however, that's an entirely different story. The hereditary monarchy was not destroyed. Okay. The absence of governmental power is easily explained due to the servitude of the nation to the the Gentile powers, Gentile empires of that day. First the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. So it's no surprise that those empires would not allow the hereditary monarchy to be destroyed. What they're going to do is if they're going to allow what is commonly called an ethnarch, okay? An ethnarch is an ethnic leader. So if they're going to allow an ethnic leader to exist at all in their subjugated territories, right? Then that's exactly the case, is that they want that leader to be subjected to them. He's going to be loyal to them. He's going to be a vassal. He's going to be a puppet, so to speak. Okay. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because without the constraining power of the monarchy, the priests became dominant and the authority of the temple became amplified. Okay. So furthermore, this authority was in the minds of some overshadowed by the fact that the rebuilt temple. Okay, so now we're jumping forward to the second temple era when or when the number one, the temple gets rebuilt under Zerubbabel. Okay, there's that's the second temple, and then even more so when Herod starts his remodeling of the temple, right? So during the second temple period, right, the nation is still under the rulership of the Persians and then the Greeks. So the temple is being rebuilt while the nation is subjected to a foreign power. Okay. So the fact that the temple is being rebuilt under the auspices of a foreign power, for a lot of Jews, that overshadows the legitimacy of the authority, right? So you've got you got a bunch of different things all happening here. And this is very important in light of the eventual birth of Christ. Because look at the pieces that we can put together. The nation had been taken captive, first the northern kingdom, then the second kingdom. The Assyrians take the northern kingdom, the Babylonians take the southern kingdom. They destroy the city, they destroy the temple, they take a large number of Jews hostage to Babylon. Now the Persians have conquered the Babylonians. They allow the Jews to go home, but they are still in charge. They are still the governing power. Any Jewish rulership is subjugated to the Persians. So therefore, like I said, that casts dispersions on the legitimacy of the authority of the temple in the eyes of some. Additionally, they're not allowing the reestablishment of the hereditary monarchy, right? But they are allowing the reestablishment of the hereditary priesthood. So all of these pieces fit together to form a very interesting political puzzle, right? No monarchy. The temple is being built under the auspices of a foreign power. And now, because of the vacuum of power, of no monarchy, the priesthood begins to be amplified in their authority. So for a lot of people, that means that the general conditions of the Second Temple era, in other words, the lack of indigenous governmental authority, the questionable legitimacy of the temple, and rule by a foreign power, okay, this is the soil, so to speak, that allowed for the germination of the Jewish sects that we read about in the New Testament. This is the time and place for the growth and the development of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots and the Essenes and things like this. This is when they start to pop up. So that is very, very, very interesting that we start to see that. Because by the time you get to Jesus' public ministry, okay, in 27 AD and beyond, right, when you get to Jesus' public ministry, it is very clear that the Pharisees were regarded as the legitimate spiritual leaders of the country. When you look at Matthew chapter 12, which is a very interesting record with regard to the rejection of Jesus as the Messiah, right? That record is dominated by an encounter between Jesus and the Pharisees. And he performs a miracle and they question it. And as a matter of fact, they not only, and he performs a miracle that, according to Jewish tradition, could only be performed by the Messiah. That's the critical point. He performs a miracle that is only possible to be performed by the Messiah, and the Pharisees witness it, and then they question the veracity of the miracle. So that's rough. That's really, really, really rough, because you've got the Messiah of Israel staring you in the face and you're denying him to his face, right? When he has just performed a messianic miracle. And then they had the audacity to ask for another. They said, Master, we would see a sign of thee. So they have just witnessed what is supposed to be a messianic miracle, a miracle that would verify his messiahship. And then they don't believe that one. And then they ask for another. That's when we see, in the transition from Matthew 12 to Matthew 13, which Matthew 13 contains the kingdom parables, right? In Matthew 13, we learned that Jesus has now changed, completely changed his way of interacting with the public, okay? Which means that he began to, it says he began to speak to them only in parables. And if you read carefully, you can see pretty obviously that he was speaking to them for the purpose of concealing information. In other words, wow, I wish I had the documentation in front of me to make this easier. He was operating, and you find this phrase several times in Matthew 13, where he says, let them who have eyes to see, see, and let those who have ears to hear, hear. Okay? Eyes to see and ears to hear. And ironically, eyes to see and ears to hear actually goes all the way back to the covenant with the land. I don't think we find it in the Abrahamic covenant itself, but we do find it in the covenant with the land, sometimes called the Palestinian covenant, that it is literally one of the provisions of that covenant, okay, is that God prophesied that they would not have eyes to see or ears to hear. Okay, so since I went there, okay, let's see if I can find this very quickly. If I can find it quickly, we will take a second, and we'll go there and we'll talk about this for just 1 second. If I can find it quickly, and maybe I can't find it quickly. If I can't find it quickly, then then maybe we won't talk. Here we go. I found it. All right, let's go. I want to take, since I went there, let's take a second and let's go there. All right. This isn't necessarily about God Save the King directly, but it certainly is a big piece of the puzzle for helping understand the Old Testament context as we push forward towards, okay, Jesus's public ministry, and certainly, of course, his birth, right? Okay. So the records I'm talking about, so here you have it. This is Matthew 12, verse 14. Okay. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Okay. I mean, good grief. They hold a council for how they might destroy him. Okay. And then a few verses later, something very interesting happens. This is Matthew 12, verses 22 and 23. Then was brought unto him one possessed with a devil, blind and dumb, and he healed him, insomuch that the blind and dumb both spake and saw. And all the people were amazed and said, is not this the son of David? Okay. And so this is what I'm talking about, is that Jewish tradition held that the practice of Jewish exorcism required establishing communication with the demon. So that's why you have other records where Jesus is asking the demon his name. Okay. You have to establish communication with the demon first, right? Therefore, in Jewish tradition, how can you establish communication with a blind and especially dumb demon? Okay, a mute demon, a demon that is causing its host to not be able to speak. Okay, so if you can't establish communication with the demon, Jewish tradition held that to expel a demon from someone who could not talk, that is a messianic miracle. And you see in that record, the people recognized it. The people were amazed and said, "Is this not the son of David?" Which is a messianic title. Okay. But the Pharisees, okay, they don't like it. And as a matter of fact, they're the ones that go on to say, but when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "This fellow doth not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of devils." So, in other words, the only way Jesus is kicking devils out of people is by using kicking out demons is by using a bigger demon. Okay. And of course, Jesus responds and says, "And Jesus knew their thoughts and said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then shall his kingdom stand?" Okay. But if I cast out devils by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God is come unto you. So then finally, later on, verse 38, it says that certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, "Master, we would see a sign from thee." So, I mean, talk about what a mess. Jesus has just performed a miracle that Jewish tradition holds could only be performed by the Messiah, and yet they have the audacity to ask for another. And that's why when you jump into chapter 13, okay, we read that it says, "All these things Jesus spake unto the multitude in parables, and without a parable spake he not unto them." So it appears that what he is doing is that he is doing this to restrict information for only those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. So now check this out, okay? Because this is part of the covenant with the land, which is an expansion of the Abrahamic covenant. We read in Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 4, "And yet the Lord hath not given you a heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear unto this day." Whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a second. Wait a second. Jesus is prophesying, pardon me, not Jesus, Moses is prophesying spiritual blindness and deafness. Okay. As a matter of fact, it's very interesting. I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day in light of personal application. I mean, personal application and what goes on in our lives and the struggles and the challenges that we deal with day in and day out, and especially in our relationship with God and with Jesus Christ. And how do you walk in fellowship? And I was taking note of the fact that the different types of maladies that Jesus healed people of, and how often it was people who were blind or deaf, right? And that made me think of this, that here Moses is prophesying spiritual blindness, spiritual deafness, and yet that was something Jesus healed frequently, right? Very, very, very interesting, right? So Moses prophesies that the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive, nor eyes to see, nor ears to hear until this day. And then Isaiah prophesies it. And this is Isaiah 6, 9, and 10. And he said, go tell this people, right? Hear ye indeed, but understand not. See ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert, and be healed. Oh my word, this is prophesied throughout the Old Testament that they would not have eyes to see or ears to hear. And if that weren't bad enough, Jesus adjudicates it. Okay. Now, this is in his public ministry, and this is late in his ministry, approaching the crucifixion, right? Triumphal entry, we read in Luke, where he adjudicates blindness on the nation of Israel, saying, if thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. Spiritual blindness all over the place. Prophesied and adjudicated all over the place, right? So I've kind of gotten off track here, but we kind of had to go there for a second, because this is critical in light of what's going on in the nation of Israel, the political, social, and religious climate that is going on in the intertestamental period leading up to the birth of Christ. And why did God appear to shepherds? Why did God appear to shepherds of all people, right? And we're told that the shepherds pretty much would tell anybody they saw that when they left the house and they left seeing Jesus in a manger in swaddling clothes and recognized him as the Messiah, it says that they went out and noised it abroad, that they were telling anybody who would stand still long enough for them to tell it to. They were telling it to. So how come the word now, yes, it's a little village, right? But if this is the advent of the Messiah, how come they didn't go crazy? Well, it's got to be the spiritual blindness. It's got to be. So at any rate, once again, this is the climate, the environment, the intertestamental period, right? The nation of Israel has been under foreign domination, foreign captivity. The Assyrians lay waste to the northern kingdom. The Babylonians lay waste to the southern kingdom. The Persians conquer the Babylonians and inherit those captives. Cyrus the Great lets them go home to build their temple, but they're still under Persian hegemony, right? For the first 100 years of the intertestamental period. Then the Greeks conquer the Persians, okay? And wow, does that start all kinds of a mess, right? That under the Greeks, because the Greeks, see, the Persians kind of left the Jews alone, right? We're going to let you go. We're going to let you rebuild your temple. We're going to allow the reestablishment of the hereditary priesthood. Now, we're not going to allow the reestablishment of the hereditary monarchy. You can't do that. But as long as you mind your own business, as long as you pay your tribute, we're pretty much going to leave you alone. But boy, that isn't what happened with the Greeks at all, okay? When the Greeks came on the scene, okay, the Greeks were much, much, much crueler to the Jews than the Persians were. Much crueler, okay? And they instituted a policy of Hellenism, that they wanted the entire known world, certainly the entire Greek Empire, to be Hellenistic. In other words, to make the world Greek. Alexander wanted to see his empire speaking the same language, following the same social customs, and practicing the same religion. Okay. And Hellenism plays a major role in our story because of how it affected the Jews both inside and outside of Judea. See, because of the captivity, there is now a very large Jewish population outside the promised land. Outside the promised land. Ooh, interesting, interesting, interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Okay. And because they are going to influence Babylonian culture and then Persian culture. Okay. There's a very interesting interconnection from this point forward between Jewish and Persian culture, in particular, Jewish and Babylonian, but then now especially Jewish and Persian culture going forward. And it is that connection, I believe, plays a major role in how the Parthian Magi were would number one would even know to look for a Jewish Messiah, and then also to know what to look for. Okay, very, very interesting. But at any rate, the Greeks were very cruel, very harsh to the Jews. So there's a big difference in how the Jews were treated outside the promised land and how they were treated inside the promised land. Inside the promised land, they were really under the thumb of the Greek leaders, in particular, a Greek leader named Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV. He had a particular hatred for the Jews. He did not like them at all. He precipitated a pogrom that was almost unprecedented at the time. And it was even worse than Nebuchadnezzar because, in the eyes of the Jews, yeah, Nebuchadnezzar might have burned the temple to the ground, but Antiochus was worse because he desecrated it. Okay. So by desecrating the temple, he desecrated their faith. By desecrating their faith, he desecrated them. So this was far worse than physical or material loss or even loss of life. This was the loss of spiritual life. Okay. Because in very simple terms, Antiochus set about to destroy every distinctive characteristic of the Hebrew faith. So now we're almost out of time. So, of course, I don't have time to go into detail, but this, of course, sets the stage for and why this time of the year is important. This sets the stage for the Maccabean revolt because it is Antiochus who did desecrate the temple. Okay. And man, the crowning insult to all this, it actually happened on the 25th of the Jewish month of Kislev in 167 BC. And it was actually in a small town outside of Jerusalem, okay, in a town called Modin, the village of Modin, northwest of Jerusalem, that they were requiring the Jews to sacrifice unclean animals, and an elderly priest named Matthias and his 5 sons lived in Modin, and they stopped the religious practice, the unclean religious practice, and they basically what it was is a Syrian Greek, a Syrian official attempted to force Matthias to perform an unclean sacrifice. Matthias killed the officer, and he also killed a collaborating Jew as well. But then Matthias and his family, they took on the Assyrian garrison, killed the Assyrian garrison, and then fled into the wilderness. And they were soon joined by thousands of faithful Jews in a full-blown revolt to Syrian rule. Okay. So it was the result of throwing off this Syrian Greek power that ruled over the nation of Israel that resulted in the liberation of the kingdom of Judea, and it also resulted in the cleansing of the temple, okay? And it is the cleansing of the temple that is celebrated every year at this time with the Feast of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. So that is very, very interesting that, that this is something we can talk about at this time of year, is that is what Hanukkah is all about, is the cleansing of the temple, and it's directly related to the context of God Save the King. Okay, all this foreign interference that they just simply could not let the Jews be Jews. So there's all this foreign interference, and then the fact that, like I said, when they came back from the captivity, no hereditary monarchy, and the hereditary priesthood became amplified. The temple became amplified. This is the context when the sects, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots and the Essenes started to pop up. There's more sects than that, many more than that. Those are just the ones that we are familiar with. But it's this really interesting, tumultuous religious and political climate into which Jesus is going to be born. And this is just what's going on right in the nation of Israel, let alone when, once again, we bring in the foreign influence, right? Okay. I mean, this was foreign influence, but it was foreign influence in, how shall we say, occupied territory, right? Within the promised land itself, let alone the foreign influence back in Babylon, or the foreign influence in Alexandria, or the foreign influence in Rome, because there's Jews in all those locations, right? And yet the Jews don't have a legitimate king, right? So once again, to wrap this up, now if you go back to the Abrahamic covenant and the prophecy of that God's going to make a great nation, put them in a land of his choosing, and then bless them in the land, and that includes the presence of their Messiah, that means that messianic expectation is just off the chart at this time, because what is needed more than anything else in the Jewish nation at this time than their Messiah, their rescuer, their deliverer, their savior. Amen. Amen. I mean, God save the King. God save the King. So we're going to wrap it up there. Once again, my name is Tim Keyes for GodSaveTheKing.org, and you've been listening to God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. Finally, you can listen to God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today, and I hope you're going to join me again next week.